Hi, folks, and welcome back to MMA Talking Heads. I'm your host, Jason Probst, along with my co-host, Loretta Hunt. And on this week's episode of Talking Heads, we are going to touch base on the debut show of MMA Uncensored Live. Loretta, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing well. I'm pretty excited to see the debut of the show on Spike. We kind of wanted to break that down and then go into a later segment kind of related to that. Very ambitious show. I think it's a great concept, interactive with the viewers and the fans. What was your assessment of the show, which kicked off with a live interview of Nick Diaz, of all people?
Yeah, well, I mean, in broad strokes, obviously a big get to get Nick Diaz. Execution obviously was an issue, and we'll get to that later. But, obviously made a statement getting Nick Diaz to sit in a seat in front of their cameras and got him on the air. My big note for the episode was I felt like they were trying to just put way too much content that the audience had trouble digesting because it was about an hour's worth of content put into 30 minutes. And I think the part of the selling point of this show is that they have those three hosts that are going to debate and talk about it. And then you're going to start to see them integrate a lot of social media, like Twitter people and people Skyping in live into the show to talk to the three hosts. And they need time to do that. I have a feeling they're going to extend this to an hour and they're just starting out a half an hour just to get it going. But as long as they're in the half hour format, they need to cut some of the content and give the guys more room to breathe and start interacting with the audience. But I'm pretty sure they're going to see that themselves and start making those adjustments.
That's funny you bring that up because that was my feeling too. I mean, you had, the Diaz, the great groundbreaking piece of, the Yakuza and the Fall of Pride and the Dan Henderson interview and some
Hmm.
picks for this weekend. And it kind of left me feeling I kind of want more of this and more time to kind of flesh out each of the segments. But, that's kind of one of the things we get used to is I think a lot of us have seen kind of UFC level production for so many years. And whenever there was, another promotion like Affliction or whatever that did any type of television production, is there's always bugs to work out, and especially with the live element. But I did like the live Twitter polls, and I thought it was a little gutsy. They put in the Twitter poll of should marijuana be included as a performance enhancing drug, and fans overwhelmingly voted no. I mean, they definitely aren't, kissing up to the powers that be. So I thought that was interesting. Outside of the Diaz interview, which I agree had some rough starts, I mean, it got off to a really difficult beginning with the question about, the marijuana situation and the commission. What did you think of the kind of the interplay and the banner and the production value? I guess did they convey the essence of the show as much as they wanted?
I think I interviewed John Slosser, who's the new VP of sports for Spike TV. And this is one of his babies, right, that he launched.
Sure.
And I think like the motives are correct and in that he wants to bring something new to the MMA market. And I definitely think this is it. This is coverage of MMA and not just the UFC, which is all we're seeing at this point is just UFC centric coverage. So I know they want to do a lot of topics that hit broad strokes and can apply to the many different promotions in this sport. And I think they got started with that. I think the strongest part, obviously, was the feature piece. I think the set's gorgeous. It's in Times Square. I think it looks good. I think they just need to give Nate and Mike Straka and Craig, the three hosts, some time to kind of start bantering back and forth and all that. John said they have a really great chemistry. I saw hints of that, but not really all of that. And so if they can kind of take out some of the content and give the guys more of a chance to kind of react to the content, and then the fans can interact to their reactions, then I think we're really going on something. The features are awesome. I really liked what they did with the Japanese MMA Rise and Fall piece, and I can't wait to see more of their features. And I want to get involved and do some of them.
Right. Well, I can't think of anybody better to do it.
Oh,
Considering
that's so sweet.
an old hand like yourself. It may be aiming high here, but I think one of my favorite shows has always been HBO's Real Sports.
Oh, me
That's,
too.
I mean,
I
that is the bastion of great sports journalism, and I'd like to see that. And I thought that Pride piece about the Yakuza was pretty ambitious and pretty much had some great execution with it. So if they could achieve something like that for MMA, really thought-provoking, hard-hitting issues, and sort of blend that in with the live interaction and this stuff, I mean, I think the show has a really good upside, and I'd love to see something like that. I didn't know you were a real sports fan as well, but of course you must be.
Yeah,
So
no, you want to hear something really geeky? I used to
sure.
dream about the day Real Sports would do an MMA piece. Like this is way back when we got no coverage.
Right,
And
right.
I was like, oh God, I can't wait for someone on the Real Sports staff to do a subject on MMA. Although now, like fast forward to today, it would probably be something really controversial,
Right, right.
you know? I just think their format is great. And I think they should also kind of steal the format a little bit, the Spike TV people, and they should probably have journalists doing these pieces, these feature
Sure,
pieces, and then put them on the couch with the three guys
sure.
afterwards. So they can really get some discussion going. Maybe there's some interesting facts that the journalist couldn't get into the video piece. You only have so much time, and they can reveal that to the audience. That's what's great about real sports is they have the journalist that produces the piece and is in it, and basically it's their baby. Come on with Brian Gumbel afterwards, and they kind of talk
Right.
about it.
They do
And
the debrief.
yeah, and he's all queued up. He's got questions that have already been put together ahead of time, specifically for information that wasn't in the piece for time concerns or whatever, or updates. Sometimes the piece gets done and there's another piece that's happened right after, and then Brian Gumbel will ask about that. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. But yeah, I think the concept, I think they're on their way. Kind of when they told me the concept, I was like, that's a great concept, but the execution is going to be really difficult. And to start at the very least, and they started it. They just kind of need to build on it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was basically two for three considering the Diaz, the great Yakuza piece, and the Henderson interview. When it started off with that the Nick Diaz interview that had everything emblematic of Nick Diaz. No eye contact.
Yep.
When they cut away, he was already removing his microphone. I mean, it was kind of a case study in not getting the social cues. It was kind of I was kind of like, well, it can only go uphill from here, and it really did. But I wanted to kind of touch base on that. A lot of the time, fans, we ingest everything we can get our hands on MMA related. We love interviews. We love knowing about their stories. You just did a fantastic interview, including a video segment that's going to go on Sports Illustrated about Ronda Rousey, and we'll touch base on that after this. But let's talk about the science of interviewing fighters because that in itself it is a craft and an art. And what are some of the things you picked up and learned in these 10 plus years of getting their stories or trying to get the stories?
Yeah, I think it's an acquired skill, right? It takes a long time to do it. And you and I have been doing this over 10 years. So I don't even know how many fighters you and I have interviewed, but it's been a lot. Well, I think Nick Diaz, what happened last night on MMA Censored, is a perfect case study. So there were a whole bunch of observations. First of all, you pointed it out. This was typical Nick Diaz.
Right.
Nick Diaz doesn't like to make eye contact. He either gives you really incredibly short answers or he goes into a huge diatribe, sometimes losing sight of what the topic really is. And that's a danger point for Nick,
Right.
because he really has no filter. So I've been really hit and miss with Nick Diaz. But, if I had known Nick Diaz was coming in last night, I probably would have said, yeah, let's still do the interview. But I'm not sure Craig Carton was the right person to do the interview because Nick doesn't know him.
Right.
And the
And
key with
familiarity is a
Nick,
big deal with Nick.
yeah, with
It's a
Nick,
big
it's
deal.
huge. If he knows you or at least knows you're like at the sport, in the sport, going to the fights, have come to his gym, like he's not going to open his arms to you necessarily all the time, but there's a level of comfort for him. And I think him tuning in for this delayed interview where there's like this time delay between the two of them, which caused them to interrupt one another
Right.
essentially, which I think a lot of fans found annoying. That's a pretty dangerous situation to be in with Nick Diaz. So
Yes,
I
it
I
is.
think familiarity with it with whoever was questioning him would have really helped. Uh, and that brings up a general point that we have is like when you start to interview these guys, they have all different types of personalities and they react to things all differently. But after you interview them once, you kind of get a good
You get a
handle on
feel.
what they like, what they don't like. And that you put that in your pocket, and then the next time you come around to them, you get going again. It comes flooding back to you, and you can, if you maneuver well, you can get some stuff out of him. Nick is a really, really extreme case, probably one of the hardest guys to interview in MMA. What do you think?
I would say yes. I would say him and Chuck Liddell was often tough. Chuck was
Yeah,
especially
Chuck is
near
just so. Yeah, he's quiet. He
One
just
word. What's the game plan? Knock him out. It's like okay, and he kind of has this. I mean,
he's really, really relaxed,
right,
and
and he's
he's
very
not there
short.
to impress anyone, and he doesn't really care if his answer, blows you away or not. If he
Right.
feels like talking about it, he will. I think the longest conversation I have ever had with Chuck Liddell is I was probably calling him for a question or an interview, and he started talking to me about shooting animals in his backyard. He
Sure.
was, trying to
Sure.
get them out of the garden or whatever, or get them off his lawn. And he
Right.
was really, really into it. He kind of went on about it for a while. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting, an interesting conversation. But yeah, you need to know these guys' personalities. I wouldn't come running at Chuck with all these tough questions. I would kind of ease into it and, get him a little more comfortable where he's a little more invested in the
Right.
interview. Because most times he's not invested in interviews. He's done 9 zillion of them at this point. And he
Right.
doesn't care.
And
I
and
cared when he didn't do interviews.
right, and that's always the tough thing as a reporter is like you're approaching it's a standard interview 101, and you don't want to be that reporter that's asking the same question. So what is your workaround in that? Mine is always like, how you feeling, how's training going, because that's kind of the peel the onion technique. Some softballs. And then you segue into the listen. These are the five stupid questions I have to ask you because it's my job, not because I'm an idiot. You
Oh, you
know,
preface it like that with them?
no, I don't. But like,
Oh,
hey, how's training going? Who you training with? What's your schedule like? The standard one, just to get on familiar ground. But the funny thing about Nick Diaz is one of the most memorable interviews I ever had was with him. It was, I believe, it was UFC 47. He had just knocked out Robbie Lawler,
mm-hmm.
and he's standing there. I think it was in the Mandalay Bay, and he's standing there with a hoodie on, and it's super crowded. Nobody knows who he is, and he's just standing there looking like Nick Diaz. And so I walked up to him. I'd followed him in his days in the IFC, and we're both in Northern California. So I'm talking to him. I said, "Hey, man, great showing. Nobody thought you could beat Lawler. How do you feel?" And Diaz goes, "This sucks." He's like, I dropped out of college or something to do this, and now I'm going to have to be a fighter full time, and this sucks. Now I got to do this. And I remember thinking, this is so baffling because I didn't know where to go with it. Okay, well, and like so he can kind of surprise you if you get him on his own terms, that raw emotion. But a lot of the time you need to ferret out those details without grading them. And the interesting thing is now how are interviews different? I remember back in the day, I would call a fighter and we'd set up a time and we'd go. But nowadays, there kind of seems to have emerged sort of this hierarchy of handlers and betweeners. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good
Oh,
thing or bad
yeah.
thing for journalists?
I don't, I mean, to me, I don't think good or bad. I just think, I try and be respectful
Right.
of, what they want me to do. So if I can reach a manager or an agent first, I will, or even a PR person at this point, I will. Some of the guys have PR agents.
Right.
But if it's someone that I've known for a while, like someone that's kind of old school, like Randy,
Right.
Randy Couture, or, even Chuck, Tito, some of the guys, obviously, they've been around before the big boom happened. I just call them directly.
Right.
And sometimes, I call the new guys too, but, Skype's been awesome to help, and so has Facebook, and so obviously has Twitter. There's a lot of great ways to reach these
Yes.
guys. And I still have guys where, I'll say, hey, do you want to do an interview? And, they'll say, sure. And I'll say, okay, do you want to call me or should I call you? I never jump out and ask for the phone number right away. And if they call me and I don't have their phone number, I always say at the interview, "Oh, if I need to reach you for some follow-up questions on this article, how can I reach you?" And then
Right.
they give me their phone number. So,
No, and I think a lot of it's about knowing kind of the go-to alternative guy, and for that, I've always been so thankful for Caesar Gracie. You
yeah.
get a Nick
He's
Diaz
cool.
interview,
Like,
and
I
then
like to talk to Caesar a lot. Like
he's
he's
fantastic.
very down to earth and just tells it like it is. He really does.
No,
And
yeah,
you got to respect that. He doesn't have the easiest client in the world.
he's like the Nick Whisperer.
It kind of is. But what Caesar does is he kind of gives Nick his space. Nick likes to have a space. He doesn't like to be people all over him. I think he's his happiest when he's in the gym and really busting his butt, or he's with his brother, in the gym or outside the gym. That's when I think he's the most at ease. But Yeah, he's definitely, you can have some awkward moments with Nick Diaz, especially if you don't really know him. Like the first couple times, you don't really know him well. You
Right.
can
And if you
walk
ask
away
them,
like, wow, that was just totally awkward.
and that's always been kind of the fun thing for me because I remember one time I was covering the WEC in 2007, and it was
Yeah.
Mayhem Miller's first fight, and we were in a hallway post fight with a bunch of reporters, and like 10 of them, and maybe two of them had really covered MMA. The rest were from local newspapers. And so they asked him, what motivated him to fight. And they didn't know Mayhem Miller was, a complete prankster and jokester and has
Right.
one of the most absurd senses of humor. And Miller started talking about how he was fighting to raise awareness, I kid you not, of female circumcision in Africa. And they all looked at each other and then started writing it down. And I was just sitting in the back going, "This is fantastic," and like, is this going to make it into the Vegas paper the next day? Because I had no idea that that's Miller. That's like whatever. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny when you're a little bit more familiar with the subject and you see somebody stumble up to Nick Diaz. Are you afraid of BJ Penn? It's like, oh God, you almost feel
Yeah.
bad for the guy. Speaking of interviews, you had a pretty good interview recently with judoka and MMA fighter extraordinaire Ronda Rousey, who challenges Miesha Tate March 3rd for the Strikeforce title. Talk a little bit about that and the video opus you've put together for Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, I had the awesome opportunity to go to Rhonda's house where she grew up. After in the morning, we went to her gym and I met her striking coach, who she's very close with. A really, really nice guy, Armenian, great striker. He's our striking coach. And we got some great video exchanges there. I mean, they have a great rapport together. And so that's how the video kind of opens up with them talking about what they talk about when they're training for Miesha Tate. It's very interesting.
Right. Which is any inside scoops? I mean, are we going to see the
Well, you know what? The confidence that you see in Ronda Rousey, let me just say it's not an act. She is uber confident and she is not going to let anyone take that away from her. So, and I hope that video kind of explains how she got, to that point. It's a really interesting case study. So, once I did this, I did a written story about Ronda Rousey on SI in January, and it just got an unbelievably phenomenal response. Like, I just think she really hits people in a certain way in the sport, and I think she's only going to get bigger. So, and I just got lucky. She revealed a lot about herself. She had a speech impediment because she was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her, and she couldn't speak clearly until about the age of 6. So she had a really
wow.
frustrating childhood. And
Wow.
then 2 years later, her father, who had been in a sledding accident and was paralyzed, and then on top of that, got a disease. So his body was never going to recuperate and get better, and he only had a certain amount of time to live. He committed suicide when she was
Mm,
8. So,
wow.
that when she started telling me all that stuff, I said, wow, that's pretty amazing, that she was able to power through two incredible tragedies, tragedies when she was younger. So I got to go to her house, and her mom's the first American to win a judo medal, a judo world championship in 1984. Her mom's great. Her mom is her rock. She's her confidant. And, the video's a lot about this space that she has, to be a strong female. Her mom was basically kind of like a stage mom, but for judo.
Sure.
Uh, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean her mom, was doing stuff she shouldn't do with the kid and pushing her when she didn't want to go there. She was like an encouraging stage mom because she could do judo and she used to train with Rhonda and show her moves. And so, we talk about that. We talk about what her mom saw in Rhonda that led her to believe that she could take judo all the way. And obviously, Rhonda did, winning a bronze medal at the Olympics in 2008. And let's just say you get to see many facets of Rhonda. Rhonda, the older sister, Rhonda, the daughter, Rhonda, the really confident fighter, Rhonda, the really vulnerable fighter.
Ooh.
Yeah. And, you know, just a lot of her motivations as to why she's doing things. And, her whole thing about trying to bring attention to women's MMA. And she's kind of put the sport on her shoulders, the women's side of the sport on her shoulders. So, everything you see with her is pretty genuine. She turns it up a little bit, and I think she says things to kind of get people's attention sometimes, but
Sure.
she doesn't. She admits to that. So
Right.
it was just, and she's just kind of really a gorgeous person. I mean, physically she's very attractive, and you look at her, and she kind of just grew on me, through this process. And I just really appreciative. Her mom was really smart and very headstrong. Her mom is a statistician. So her mom was doing stats in the other room while I was interviewing Rhonda
Really?
first. Yeah, her mom's uber smart, intelligent. And her mom's writing a judo book right now. And yeah, it was just like this really unique situation, where all these things lined up for her, including these tragedies, all these certain things happened. And her mom taught her all these things, and they're all applicable to MMA. And her mom was doing this just for judo, but lo and behold, MMA becomes something that's a possibility for Ronda, and she kind of falls into it, and everything's kind of just falling into place for her because she's done all this preparation
Hmm.
for MMA before she even knew she was going to get into MMA. And that's, to me, I think is a very unique situation. I don't see it often in MMA, and I've never seen it in a woman before because we just haven't had as many women as men fighters. So I just jumped on the chance to do it, and luckily they all live in the LA area, so it wasn't hard for us to get there.
When are we going to be able to see the finished video up at SI.com?
We're I don't know, sometime next week, I hope. I still have SI still going to look at it, but they're we're just sending it in now, so hopefully everything will be on par, and it should be up sometime next week. I'm also thinking of maybe doing another Ronda Rousey article. I just have so much content from that day I spent with her,
Right.
and I'm playing with the idea. I don't know what you think of this, so I'd like to hear your opinion. But to me, Ronda is like a Dan Henderson or a Matt Lindland. You have that Olympic background, that
Hmm.
really, really strong base, and then you come in and they have some other talents. They're athletic, they're able to kind of stack some stuff on there, and I almost feel like she's almost like a Hoist Gracie, where
Sure.
her
That's a great analogy.
technique is so strong in one area that I think the women are going to have a really hard time with her,
She could be a
and
paradigm shifter, is what you're saying. Just shift the whole
yeah,
paradigm moving to MMA.
she's just really unique. And you're right. She probably is going to be one of those paradigm shifters that forces everyone else to up their games, right? And
Right.
changes the types of styles that are important in women's MMA, So yeah, I'm thinking of doing an article about that, and getting more in depth into her background. Obviously, the overpour, the stuff that we weren't able to show in the video, because there's so much phenomenal stuff, and there's so much more about Rhonda. She's really, really multifaceted,
Hmm.
For instance, this is kind of really neat. And I don't know if I'm going to get to put this in the article, but she's really close with her younger sister, who's 14 and gorgeous, and was a judo player too, but is now a soccer star, I think.
Oh, wow.
And it's her sister Julia. Julia was at the house, and I ended up interviewing Julia with her, and a little piece of that is in the piece to show Rhonda, the older sister. But we went upstairs touring, and as it turns out, Ron is an artist. And
Really?
she painted her sister's room, all four sides of her sister's room, with this seascape, underwater, and like you see the detail in like this kelp that she has in the corner.
Really?
It's kelp that's in motion in the water, which is pretty clever, and above average. I'm definitely not an artist, so to me it was very impressive. So I said to Ronnie, oh, that's really interesting, the kelp, and she goes, that's actually based on two different types of kelp, and she started explaining it all to
Really?
me, and I was like, that's kind of neat. And her sister's really funny and cool, and we kind of exchange stories a little bit. I have five sisters, so we had some sister stories to exchange, and then we went out into the hallway, and they went into her mom's room, and they took out one of her mom's really, really big judo awards, like a
Mm-hmm.
trophy, but it's all made out of crystal.
Really?
And they were like, don't tell mom. We're going to do this. And they like
Handling the
opened it up.
trophy.
They were so happy to show it to me. It was really heavy too. It was Austrian crystal. It was gorgeous. But and then they put it away. And so that stuff didn't make it into the video. Although if it did, then their mom would know that they're going through her stuff. But the place is littered with trophies. Everyone's judo this and judo that. And it's just a really, really super talented family. So I was just really excited, to go and kind of piece together something to show everyone in a different medium. I just love telling stories, and now I'm getting the opportunity more to show stories in the video medium, and I couldn't be happier. It's a fun new way to kind of get these stories out on these fighters.
And that's a great thing too. You talk about all the extra content. I think it's something if you've been in any beat long enough, you really I always call that the vault. Little tidbits you put away and you'll plug it into some story later
Yeah.
when the fighter has a fight or a situation where it relates to that and don't worry about missing it if you don't do that second story because I've been feeling Ronda Rousey win or lose is going to be around for a while. Fans, if you haven't seen her, you need to check out Ronda Rousey highlight videos. She grapples like a man, like a very very strong man. I mean,
How long are
she's
those highlight videos? Because like none of her
they're not
fights.
very long. You can
I
pretty
think
much
the
fit
longest
like
is 39 seconds at this point.
yeah,
So
and you can throw in like all of her wins and like 5 tournament victories inside of like 3 minutes. I mean, it's the way she chains submissions together, super aggressive, very technical. I mean, Olympic level athlete, and I think the Hoist Gracie of women's MMA. I mean, I think she could be a paradigm shifter. It's really going to be just a case of how much progress she's made in taking on Miesha Tate. So, folks, we wanted to just give you a preview on that. Take a look at Loretta's video next week at si.com, as well as a lot of her great work there. And this has been another episode of MMA Talking Heads, and we will see you next time on
MMA Talking Heads.
Oh Yeah.